The Constitution that we live by today was not the nation's first Constitution. The first Constitution was called the Articles of Confederation. It was a loose association of strong independent states with a weak central government. Almost from the outset, it was seen as ineffective. So the leaders of the new nation created a new constitution, one in which the federal government and the state governments shared some powers, but which made the laws passed by federal government supreme over the states. Written into the Constitution are directions for that division of power. Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution is called the Supremacy Clause. It states that the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress are the supreme law of the land, and that judges in the individual states are bound to adhere to those laws and the judgments of the Supreme Court. Article 4, Section 2 is called the Full Faith and Credit Clause. Its purpose is to ensure that judicial proceedings in one state will be respected by all states. For example, if a person from Florida is involved in a car accident in Georgia, the Supreme Court can force Florida to hear the case, even though it originated in Georgia. Also included in Article 4, Section 2 is the Privileges and Immunities Clause. This clause protects the fundamental rights of individual citizens in any state and restrains any state from discriminating against out-of-state citizens. Article 1, Section 8 is called the Commerce Clause. This clause gives Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states, and with Indian tribes. However, because the word commerce has different meanings, the clause was left to interpretation. As with so many other issues, decisions of the Supreme Court have shaped the understanding of the Commerce Clause. The first decision came in 1824 in the case of Gibbons v. Ogden. New York State had given Aaron Ogden, a steamship operator, an exclusive license to operate ferries between New York and New Jersey. Thomas Gibbons, another steamship operator, also ran ferries along that route. When he was denied access to these waterways, he sued Ogden. New York State ruled in favor of Ogden, but Gibbons continued his fight. Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court. The court reversed the decision. In doing so, Chief Justice John Marshall pointed to the Federal Licensing Act of 1793, which gave Congress, not the state of New York, the right to regulate commerce that crossed state lines. And the ruling defined commerce as not just articles in trade, but as any dealings between states. That decision has affected many issues in which state lines are crossed. Another important decision came in 1819 in the case of Mcculloch v. Maryland. James Mcculloch was the head cashier at the Second Bank of the United States in Maryland. The Second National Bank had been established by an act of Congress. The state imposed a tax on the bank, but Mcculloch refused to pay it. The case was brought to the Supreme Court, which ruled that under the Necessary and Proper Clause of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress had implied powers to create the bank and that the state of Maryland lacked the power to tax it. The tax, the court said, was unconstitutional because a state cannot impede constitutional federal laws. To this day, this case remains one of the most important in the history of the Supreme Court. While the Constitution gives certain powers to the individual states, it is essential that the states work together to attain common goals. For example, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey oversees the complex system of bridges, highways, and other transportation infrastructures in the New York and New Jersey area. This essential organization was established by the two states through an interstate compact and authorized by Congress. However, from time to time, states may have disagreements. If they can't be settled outside the legal system, Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution states that the Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction to decide the case in order to ensure a fair decision. The federal government can also use other means to exert influence over the states, like offering grants and funds. For example, in 1984, Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, which required every state to raise the minimum age for the purchase and public possession of alcohol to 21. Under the Constitution, establishing regulations like these is left to the individual states, not the federal government. But the Act stated that any state that did not comply with the law would face a reduction in highway funds from the federal government. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, all states have complied with the law.